Welcome to Bio 360 Genetics. Some of you may know me. I see some familiar faces. For those of you who don't, I'm Mariano Losacol. I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Biology. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, super briefly, so that you get to know a little bit about my trajectory. So I was born and raised in Argentina. Hopefully that might sort of take the guessing game out of my accent a little bit out of the way. I lived there until I finished college. Then I went to, in Argentina, I went to school to the University of Buenos Aires, and I majored in biology, like many of you. Then I moved to Canada, to Toronto, where I got my PhD studying cell biology of cancer. I'm not telling you this because we're not necessarily study or focus much on cancer in this class, but just so that you know that if you have any questions or there is any curiosity that you like to try and work out in terms of cancer and genetics, feel free to ask. I finished my PhD in 2005, and in 2006 I came to the US and I started working in genetics proper. So I've been working in genetics for almost 20 years now. My lab here sees and studies genes that control stem cells in fruit flies. I will pepper a few things that we do in our lab here and there throughout the semester, mostly so that you can see the applicability of what you're learning, so that you get a sense for how what you're learning from books is actually applied in real life. By the way, that's the scientific name of fruit flies, in case you didn't know it, Drosophila melanogaster. And my pronouns are he, him, his. All right, so that's, less than a minute, hopefully, about myself. I wanted to spend the first few minutes talking about the structure of the class, grading, what kinds of assignments and exams you may expect. I don't know how many of you got a chance to read the syllabus. Over the weekend or sometime last week, I invited you all to browse some of the pages in Canvas that cover the syllabus. If you didn't get a chance yet, please do so that you get a better sense for how the class is structured. But I figured that today we cover together some of the more important points. So your final grade in this class is calculated with this formula. Every semester I get the question, so what's my grade? You go back to this formula, okay? And it is a pretty simple formula. It has various terms, but it's pretty simple at the end of the day. It is the points that you get from exams, and we have 3 term exams and a final. I'll discuss them in a little bit more detail next. So it's the points that you get from exams plus the points that you earn from these elective activities that we'll have throughout the semester, divided by the sum of 900 plus the same number of points that you got from elective activities. This is not a total that is available to you. That is the total that you got from these activities. And the way this formula works is any points that you get from exams add to your final grade because they're counted against a fixed number, right? They're counted against a fixed total. These number won't change, but the higher these numbers are, the higher that ratio, right? Whereas the elective points are a little different. Elective points, the reason this formula is designed like this is such that any elective points that you earn throughout the semester help. But if for whatever reason you couldn't really get so many elective points, it's fine because they're not going to go into the numerator, but they're not going to go in the denominator either. And in fact, in the syllabus, I have some pretty strong language saying that even if you didn't do absolutely any of the elective activities, which obviously I don't recommend, but even if you decided to do none of them, you could still get an A in the class because this would be a 0, that would be a 0, and then it comes down to your exam points divided by 900. Right? Any questions about that? So once again, the take-home message is you should obviously worry about exam points, study for the exams, try and learn as much as you can, and do well in the exams. You shouldn't worry or stress at all about elective activities for a number of reasons that I'll explain in a bit more detail soon. So let's talk about those exams. I mentioned there is 3 term exams for 300 points each for a total of 900. And then there is a final. Now notice that or there, bolded and underlined. So you guys get it, right? The final is optional. So at the end of the semester, during finals week, you will have the option to take the final if you choose to. The other alternative that you have, there's two alternatives. One of the alternatives is to retake any one of the term exams. The reason I do that is sometimes life happens and you do really well in two of the exams, not so well on the other. So if you take the final, you kind of have to restudy the whole thing because the final is cumulative. Whereas if all you need to do is improve one grade, then you can focus on that one term exam that you didn't do so well in, and then you retake that one during finals week. That's one of the options. The other option is do nothing. If you did pretty well with the term exams, and by that time, or by that point, by the end of finals, by finals week, you have enough points that you're happy with your final grade, then you do nothing. It's fine, because this is optional, okay? And yes?
So if we decide to take the final,
yeah.
and let's say we do even worse than what we have.
Thank you, because that's what I was gonna say next. It's designed such that you cannot do worse. Because one other thing that I know very well is sometimes people do okay during the term, then they take the final and they do worse, but they had a headache, they had the flu, they had stress, whatever. You keep whatever greater sum of points you have by the end of all of this. So if the sum of terms is more than the final, that's what you keep. If the final is more than the sum of terms, that's what you keep. Same applies to the term exams. Let's say that you take the three, one of them you didn't do so well, you retake that one, and you do actually worse than the first time around. You keep the first grade. It's all designed such that what happens during finals week cannot hurt you. May not help much, but it can never, ever hurt you. One thing that I say in the syllabus, and I will emphasize here, the only thing that I'll say is at the time that finals week comes, you'll have to make a sort of a strategic decision, because sometimes you may think, well, I'm going to study for the final, try and better my grade. You may get there or not, and all the time that you spend studying for this class, you may take away from studying for others. So at that time, you'll have to make a calculated decision. Since this is optional, you'll have to exercise free will and make some informed decisions, okay? I can help you with those decisions when the time comes. Every semester I get students saying, so what should I do? And I can kind of walk you through the decision process and you know, what are the pros and cons, but all of these is optional, yeah? And I have it written in the syllabus, but I'll say now, we have a disclosure, I guess, in the syllabus that finals week, should there be a campus-wide disruption of any kind, the final exam or the term retakes get canceled, right? You guys weren't around, but several years ago, for whatever reasons, it was trendy to threaten campus with bombs and stuff like that. And there were years that finals weeks were canceled, or people were, you know, taking exams at Starbucks. It was a disaster. So from then on, CSUN has a campus-wide policy that should there be any campus-wide disruptions, finals get canceled. Okay. Why do I say that? It's not too scary or anything like that. Please, quite the opposite. It's just so that you don't get a little complacent and say, oh, I'm not going to take exam 2. I'll just retake it during finals week. I'll be fine. Because should anything happen during finals week, you may not have a chance to retake that exam. Okay? Questions so far? Okay. Let me see if I said everything. Final retake, any one of the exams. Oh yeah, what are the exams like? All multiple choice questions via a Canvas quiz for the term exams, somewhere between 40 and 50, somewhere between 60 and 70 for the final, and again, cumulative. And the questions that you'll find in exams are similar to the questions you'll encounter in weekly in-class quizzes and some of the homework quizzes that we'll do throughout the semester. And PLF, which we'll talk about in a second. All right, those elective points. Basically, everything else outside of exams in this class is elective points. In-class quizzes, homework assignments, writing assignments, anything that is extra goes towards that pool. Elective points, you can accumulate up to 300. That's the maximum. But there's going to be way more than 300 points available to you throughout the semester. I ran a back of the envelope calculation just yesterday. I think the first 3 weeks we're already pushing 100 points available to you. Why? Because that should take the pressure away from missing 1 or 2 or 3 or several of these activities, because you can always make it up later in the semester, right? And I do that for a reason. Not only does that kind of take a little bit of the stress away from your side, but it also takes away the pressure from me to make personal accommodations based on exceptional circumstances. I understand that life happens, but I can only tell when life happens to you when you tell me. I can only assume that life is happening to everybody, right? So it's the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and I think that's a little unfair. So to accommodate for that, I will not accommodate for redos or exceptions or retakes of any kind when it comes to elective points. When it comes to exams, of course, there is season policy, medical reasons, deployment, sports, blah, blah, blah. We can discuss all of that. But for these elective activities, I will not accommodate any excuses, exceptions, redos, or retakes, because it just automatically creates unfairness, okay? But to compensate for that, there's going to be so many more points available to you that if you miss several of these, you shouldn't worry, you can always make it up, okay? When I look like this, not spacing, I just want to see if there are any questions. Yeah, I said this already. Elective points help when you earn them, but won't hurt much when you don't, because of the math behind that formula. And I wanted to show that graphically. So this is a graph that shows how your grades change depending on how many elective points you earn and how many exam points you earn. And I want you to notice a few things about these slides. And by the way, I posted the slides on Canvas. Do you guys see them?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, cool. In case someone wants to take notes on them or whatever. One thing that I think I mentioned in the syllabus, all lectures are going to be recorded. I'm recording today's lecture as well. I'm going to post them afterwards. And there may be slides that you see here on the screen but are not in your deck. That's for sort of show factor and for surprise, right? So if ever you see a slide that is not in your deck, don't panic. It's by design. But afterwards, I'm going to post the full deck of slides with any annotations that I make. I'm not really annotating anything on these guys because there's no point. But as we go through material, I'm going to make annotations, and you're going to have access to those after lecture. So back to this. This is a graph that shows the distribution of grades based on that accumulation of elective and exam points. And what I wanted to stress about these is that you'll notice that there is a slope here. So it is true that the more elective points that you earn, the fewer exam points you need to reach the same grade, right? So let's say that you're here at 600 exam points. If you got 0 elective points, then you're going to be sitting at a boundary between a C and a C+. But if you accumulated some elective points, you might hit a B-. So yes, elective points do help, right? But the other thing to notice about this graph is that the slope is more or less pronounced depending on how many exam points you have. So elective points are, and I don't necessarily mean this in a bad way, yellow is A, right? So elective points are not gonna help much if you already hit like upper 800 points from exams. That's good news anyway, because you're approaching the A as it is. They are gonna be a lot more help if you didn't do so well in the exams, okay? So the contribution of these elective points to your final grade depends on how well you did in exams. All of that to say, all of these elective activities are really mechanisms and conduits for you to practice the material and engage with the material, you okay? In such a way that you do better in the exams. What really counts more heavily in this class is the exams, okay? Yes?
You said the exams were like multiple choice, right?
Uh-huh.
Are there going to be any like choose all or nine?
Yes.
So would you grade that like if you get one of
Yeah, I don't make that decision. Canvas does. And the way it works is it will give you partial points for every correct option that you choose correctly, and it will deduct points for every wrong choice that you choose incorrectly. So if Not that anyone would try anything like this, but if there is 5 or 6 options and you pick them all because, the right answers are going to be among them, you'll probably get a 0 because Canvas will deduct any wrong choices as well. But that's not my decision, that's Canvas. For the mobile, so you guys most of you may have used Canvas before in Canvas quizzes when it is one of those multiple options. Instead of a little box, you have a little circle or the other way around. So you can tell the difference. And I've always tried my best. I may have missed 1 or 2, but I always try my best to say, in parentheses, choose all that apply. Or the prompt in the question would say, which of the following 2 are true? Which of the following 2 are false? Right? Or which 2 of the following are true? Which 2 of the following are false? Sort of give you a little guidance. Because missed right options don't deduct, if you have doubts ever, just don't answer. Because you get points for every right one that you choose, but every wrong one that you choose, you get deductions, right? So it's better to go for what you feel comfortable with and safe. And if you have any questions, just leave it blank. For those questions, right? All right. PLF. Show of hands. Who has heard of PLF before? But about half of the class. And have you guys attended? Another show of hands? Kind of? Okay. So we do have, this is recent news, we do have a PLF instructor, Susanna. So if you don't mind, at least wave, like, do your wiggle wave. There you go. PLFs are going to be held Wednesdays, 4:30 to 5:20, and then tentatively Mondays, 1:20 to 2:10, though we have to confirm that. I'm going to try my best to let you know ASAP what the final dates and times are. We were not going to start PLF sessions until next week anyway, so you don't have to worry about any of these this week. Okay. Attendance to PLF is optional. You don't get extra points for attending, so it's totally up to you. The way we design PLF sessions is such that you engage as a group with some sort of warm-up exercises in the form of quizzes that are going to be kind of like the ones that you might find in exams, right? So just to get the fluids going. But then PLF is sort of carved time for you to ask any questions you may have about lecture material or homework. And it's a good opportunity to practice some questions before the exam, right? So you're going to have some homework quizzes and all of that you're going to do on your own if you have any questions. And by the way, I have a policy that I always reveal the right answer after the quiz is due. So you will see what the right answer was, but even then, sometimes you may not quite figure out why that was. So PLF is a good option to try and get those questions answered. Another really, really good option is office hours. My office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays, same day of class. But in the morning, 11 to 1, I don't bite. Come visit me. We can chat. We can talk about questions, homework assignments. I'm not going to give you answers, obviously. I'm not going to do the assignment for you, but more than happy to discuss any questions you may have, okay? Oh, any questions about class structure / organization? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So all the quizzes are going to be on Respondus, right?
Yes. All the quizzes that we take here in class. The homework quizzes won't require Respondus.
And for the homework quizzes, it's only one chance to do it, or is it?
Yeah, it's only one chance. Yeah. I know I might have come across like, oh, come on, seriously, we're starting with these Respondus quizzes today, but I really want to push you guys to get that sorted out ASAP. I don't want you to come to me the morning of the exam. Oh, I don't have a device with Respondus. So that's why all of the in-class quizzes from here until the exam are going to use Respondus. Homework quizzes won't. And I'm setting up the quizzes in class through Respondus such that you don't need Respondus to check out the quiz afterwards. So you don't have to go into Respondus and just to see what the answers were, okay? All right. No questions? Yeah.
Do you have a topic sheet for like exams, or would you just tell us what chapters it's
Yeah, okay. So the latter, throughout the weeks in Canvas for each module, the very first thing you'll find within each module is a readings for the week or weeks. And there it's a page essentially with not only the chapters, but also often the sections within certain chapters and links to them. I don't know if you guys had a chance to see, we don't have a textbook in this class. We use 2 or 3 different OERs, they're called, so Open Educational Resources. This really means free ebooks or free websites that offer about the same material as the textbook would for free. Now, in a way, I'm so glad you asked that question because I was forgetting already. And I don't think I have that language in the syllabus. Why 3, 4 textbooks? And particularly, why are they so similar? Well, because similarity and repetition helps with understanding and retention. So you will find that I have 4 links to transcription, to 4 different books, right? None of them is really long. These are not legit college-style textbooks, pages after pages after pages. They're normally 1 page or 2, right? And you will find that the information is very, very redundant. But it is a way for you to home in on details that one website may have mentioned, but the other one didn't. It may be an opportunity for you to learn the material from a slightly different perspective. Different authors have different ways to communicate ideas, and some of them may gel better with your style of learning than others. So the idea with all of these readings is not that you have to do them all. You might get away with 1 or 2 of these sources. But the idea behind this is that you can engage with all of them and then integrate the information in your own notes. So my advice to you would be read these things with some sort of notebook, notepad, or some electronic device to take notes such that you make that information grow as you go through these different sources. Now, to your question, do I have like a study guide or a list of topics? Not really. The idea is that we are going to cover the material that we went through from books and lectures. So you'll have to come up with that on your own. Any other questions? All right. So, I'd like to now do, this is going to be the first of the semester, a think, group, ask activity. Normally it would be a think, group, share, but this is a think, group, ask. Here's the idea. These are some of the fundamental concepts in genetics that are typically covered in prerequisite coursework, right? So to be here, you would have had to take intro bios, and all of these concepts, sometimes more deeply, sometimes less deeply, but all of these concepts are covered by those previous courses, right? Now, I do know also that some of these things may have been in your mind at some point, but you may have forgotten. I would invite you to go through this list, and the think group means just look at this list, think about it, and then talk to your neighbors, see if there's any of these concepts that you're not quite sure about, or you forgot, or kind of rings a bell, but you're not quite certain what it means, okay? And the reason I have this list is because at some point, even though we're going to introduce many of these concepts, at some point, these are going to become things that we seamlessly use in conversation, right? So I'm not going to stop to define what a prokaryote is versus a eukaryote every time that we use those terms. I'm not going to stop to define haploid versus diploid and so forth. So I'm assuming that you have a pretty good grasp of all of these things, even though some things we will revisit throughout the semester, they will pop up here and there in conversation, and it would be important that you know what they are. So find 1 or 2 classmates, look at the list carefully, and if there is anything that you're not quite sure about, ask. All right. You thought about these things, you grouped. Now it's time to ask if you have any questions. You know everything? We can just keep the semester.
I think just a review of the last one, the polygenic.
Polygenic versus pleiotropic. You don't think you ever heard those words? Maybe. So, can anyone define polygenic and pleiotropic?
Well, I just want to take a guess on it.
Okay.
Polygenic, is it like multiple genes make up a single trait?
Uh-huh.
Determine it?
Uh-huh.
And like pleiotropic, maybe it's like one gene for like determine a trait.
So close. So you certainly got the first half right. Polygenic, many genes, right? And it refers to traits that are defined or that for which several genes contribute information, right? So we talk about polygenic traits. The textbook example is height. So there's not one gene that controls human height or tree height. There's several of them. For humans, it's calculated as around 200 genes that contribute to height. So those are polygenic traits. Ironically, these two terms, even though they go hand in hand, the polygenic refers to the trait, right? To the physical manifestation of a thing. So we talk about polygenic traits. Pleiotropic is sort of the mirror image of that. Is one gene controlling many traits. So this is many genes, one trait. This is one gene, many traits. Okay? Cool. Any other questions about anything? All right, so seems like we might be starting on a strong footing. Yeah? Okay, cool. So let's get started then. I'll start with a simple question. What is genetics? And by the way, you'll get to know my style. When I ask a question, rarely is there one correct answer. Most of my questions that throw out like that tend to be open-ended. So, what is genetics? Just speak your mind.
Genes that are passed down.
Genes that are passed down. So, genes passed down. Yes.
Study of like heritable traits.
Heritable traits. Okay. What else comes to mind when we say genetics?
Variability.
Variability. I bet you're right.
Like it can also be like dominant or recessive.
Dominant recessive, okay. Random, that word comes to mind. I'm actually gonna pair it up with variability. I'm gonna say randomness, if you don't mind the paraphrase. Anything else?
How they interact and function.
Interact and function, who or what? Genes. So gene interactions? I gotta confess, guys, I'm a little surprised that I'm not hearing a 3-letter acronym that people normally associate. DNA, right? DNA. And I don't mean to put words in your mouths, but when I asked this question previous semesters, one of the first things that came up is DNA. Okay, DNA. Yeah. DNA, RNA. What were added? Anything else? proteins.
Sex-linked.
I ran out of space. Look at that. Sex-linked. Exactly. All of these things that come to mind when we say genetics. And the reason for that is because genetics is in every way related to all of these things, right? So genetics is a pretty wide field, right? Now, I notice, and you probably notice as well, that there is a bias towards anything that has to do with inheritance here, right? So genes being passed down, heritable traits. I emphasize heritable there, right? Because the study of traits, if you're not really looking at their inheritance or their heritability, you may not actually be doing genetics per se. You may be doing biochemistry, you may be doing molecular biology, but not necessarily genetics, right? Now, variability and randomness, we're slowly starting to get into the realm of, okay, yeah, so genes are passed down and traits are heritable, but how come there is so much variability, right? If traits are being passed down from one generation to the other, why aren't all generations alike? Or why aren't all individuals within a generation all the same? Mutations. So I'm going to put that along with, I normally hear DNA and mutations together. So mutations. Yes, the idea that things can change, right? So mutations may be part of the explanation for variation for sure, but there is others, okay? Dominant or recessive, that's obviously getting a little deeper into the topic. Those are just super technical terms that are going to come up later. Yeah. Punnett square. Yeah. Punnett square. That sounds like PTSD, actually, a little bit, yeah? We will do some Punnett squares, but that's going to be, I might as well tell you now. So the way that the semester is structured, for some of you who may have peeked in Canvas, the first third of the semester, we're going to cover molecular. I almost gave it away. But we're going to cover anything that has to do with DNA, RNA, and proteins. And then we're going to talk about Punnett squares and dominance and recessives and all of that stuff. And then towards the end, what I think it's a pretty fun part of the class, we'll talk about modern genetics. We're going to talk systems biology, CRISPR, and genomics and that stuff. Okay, editing babies. So dominant recessive gene interactions, that's getting a little more deeper into the weeds. The reason I kind of forced DNA, RNA, and proteins out of you guys is because that's another big part of genetics as well. So for literally decades, if not over a century, genetics was almost like a math game, right? So people would study and understand genetics simply from a point of view of probabilities, and it was almost like a puzzle. And you didn't really know what the pieces were, but you knew kind of how they behaved. From 1950 onwards, and this is something we'll discuss in a bit more detail on Thursday, this new world opened up within the discipline of genetics, and that was understanding genes from a molecular perspective. So nowadays, if we were to throw a sort of a more modern definition of genetics around, this I took from a book that I used to use many years ago, so kind of copyright infringement right now, but genetics is the scientific study of heredity and the variation of inherited characteristics. Check this out. It includes the study of genes themselves, how genes function, interact, and produce the visible and measurable characteristics, those traits that we see in individuals. And the one thing that I wanted to emphasize about this definition is that in a way it contains both aspects of genetics. The study of heredity, how things are passed on generation to generation. That's something that genetics has been doing for over 100 years now, 200 almost, and that we call transmission genetics. That's sort of the technical term we give to the study of heritability and how things are being passed down from one generation to the next. All of the rules that apply and so forth. So transmission genetics. But like I said, several decades ago with the discovery of DNA and the sort of advances in molecular biology, now we're probably as much, if not more, interested in the study of how genes function, how they connect that heritable information to the actual physical characteristics we see in organisms, and that is what we would call molecular genetics. The reason I like to emphasize that, and after this semester probably you have a much deeper appreciation and understanding of this, but until right now, many of you may have thought that genetics is all about the study of inheritance. But now I would say, and this includes my lab for instance, the vast majority of researchers doing research in genetics are not necessarily concerned with transmission of heritable information, but on how that inherited information is used. Right? What are the mechanisms that connect inherited information in the form of pieces of DNA to the physical characteristics of organisms? So in my lab, for instance, we study stem cell genetics, but we don't care too much about what parents pass to their progeny and that progeny passes to their progeny in turn. We care more about how specific genes control, in our case, stem cells within one generation. Okay? And that would be part of molecular genetics. Any questions about any of that? No? Yeah.
Can you explain what transmission genetics is?
The study of how heritable information gets passed down from one generation to the next. And when I say that, it sounds like, well, you just said it, right? Information that is heritable is defined by what gets passed down from one generation to the next. So it's sort of a circular definition. What we mean by transmission genetics and the study of that is what are the rules that apply? And that's where things like dominant and recessive come in, and the probabilities of passing a certain allele depending on what other allele are present in that organism, blah, blah, blah. We'll get sick of all of that in a few weeks. But as a discipline is the study of the rules that govern the transmission of heritable information from one generation to the next. Okay, so let me ask you guys this. Let's say that you have those two seagulls. Hopefully everybody can see them on the screen. The one on the left has really dark, say, black wings. The one on the right has much lighter gray wings. Let's say that we cross them. What will be the wing color of chicks that are born to these two seagulls? What do you guys think? What would you predict? Somewhere in between, sort of a mid-gray, I'm going to say. Okay, cool. So mid-gray. Anyone has different ideas?
It can either be the darker wing color or the lighter wing color.
Okay, and which one would you predict? Either. I'm going to say either for now. But on that vein, does anyone want to venture which one it'll be, the dark or the light gray? It's hard to tell. It could be either.
Whichever has the dominant.
Dominant. And which one of those two is more likely to be the dominant? The darker, right? Everybody agrees with that, or do I have some disagreements? Yeah? The truth is that without a lot more information, we just don't know. It could be that middle gray. It could be either the dark or the light. And yes, we do have a human tendency from experience to sort of assume that anything that is more intense in pigmentation, in size, in hardness, will dominate over anything that is lighter or softer or shorter, right? But reality is that the gene that makes these wings to be lighter could be an enzyme that chops up the dark pigment. So when the progeny inherits both, the enzyme will chop up all the pigment and the chicks inherit the light gray wings. We just don't know. We just don't know, right? So when you tell people that you're taking genetics in college, be prepared for a tsunami of questions. Oh, I had a grandpa that had blue eyes and the reality is that most of the times we just don't know because we don't have all the information that we need to make some calculated predictions or informed predictions, okay? Now, as we will see throughout the semester, over time we have accumulated from collective experience some sense of what might happen. This middle gray, no one said, oh, the wings are going to be green. No one said, oh, the wings, it's not going to have wings, it's going to have arms, right? We have certain boundaries as to how we think about these things that comes from experience in the natural world, right? But what we'll do throughout the semester is see how it's sometimes unpredictable and that you need a little more information. Now, once you have that information, then you can start making some pretty educated predictions. Like, for instance, if I told you that the dark pigmented wing is dominant over the light pigmented wing, then yeah, we can make predictions about what the chicks might have. Though I would have to give you information about whether that individual is homozygote or heterozygote, and so forth. Okay? Questions, anyone? All right. So, someone in the back said mid-gray, and I emphasized already a number of times that that's intuitive. Anytime that, like if I told you, kind of giving it away because this comes up later in the semester, but if you cross a dog, like a Great Danish and a Chihuahua, if they can mate, what is the progeny going to be like? And if any of you say, well, mid-sized dog, that's intuition, right? So the mid-gray wings is intuition. And it is based on what people have seen for centuries, that often the traits in progeny is some sort of mixture of the traits that were present in the parents. And at some point, the thinkers of the time gave that theory of inheritance a name. They called it the theory of, does anyone know? Blending, right? When things mixed in progeny, it was because of blending inheritance. Things blending together in the progeny. And that would explain things like dark wing and light wing mid-gray, or tall and short mid-size, and so forth, right? Now, that was based on intuition, on observations that humans had made for centuries. But it was not the only thing that humans had observed throughout history. There were many other cases in which one of the traits would be observable in the progeny, either one, the dark wings or the light wings. Sometimes it was one, sometimes it was the other. Sometimes you had several siblings and some of them had one and the others had the other, right? And that is what this guy, Gregor Mendel, decided to study a little more formally and decided to throw a whole lot of math to. But it was not something that was completely unknown before. So if you encounter somewhere that Mendel discovered the inheritance of these unique traits in a very, I don't want to give away the term, but in a way that shows one of the parental traits, he didn't discover it. He just formalized it mathematically, okay? But because he did formalize it mathematically and he had a bunch of data to support it, he decided to give that mode of inheritance a name as well. This may be a little trickier. Do you guys know what he called that mode of inheritance? I hear voices. No? Yeah. Particulate. Particulate. Kind of a weird term, but that comes from particles. because what the model of inheritance that he formulated mathematically involved particles that were being passed on from parents to progeny in a way that he described with formulas, right? And that we will study a little later this semester, although some of it you may have covered in previous coursework. So on the one hand, we have the theory of blending inheritance. On the other hand, we have the theory of particulate inheritance. I just said that. So Mendel's crosses demonstrated that for several characters, progeny inherited the traits of either parent. It's not random that I threw that diagram there. There are instances in which you cross two plants that are both producing purple flowers, and you get progeny with white flowers. Mendel had to explain that as well, and he did, right? And the way he did it is through this model of particulate inheritance. Okay? So this is obviously the early days. And we had for literally close to 50 years these two competing theories. The theory of blending inheritance and the theory of particulate inheritance. And these gave rise to pretty strong-minded camps, people that advocated for one or the other, and some pretty nasty academic fights, right, as to who was right. And the arguments went kind of, well, Mendel's particular inheritance probably applies to this plant and some weird characters, not even all of the characters in the plant. So sure, it's some curiosity about these pea plants, about some bird, some tree here and there, but it's not really what explains inheritance across life. When we look around us, everything seems to be inherited through blending inheritance. Every time that I see something big mating with something small, I see progeny that is mid-size. So there's got to be some sort of blending. So these guys went at each other for a while. That's what that slide means. So there was particular inheritance versus blending inheritance until a bunch of mathematicians mostly said, hold on a second. How can we generate the type of distribution of traits that we normally see in nature, where nothing is black or white, but there is this range of grays in between, from a mathematical point of view, right? Is there a way that we can mathematically, and talking about particles, come up with a distribution of traits, right, or measurements? And that's where the famous polygenesis and genetic interactions came in. Because when people started, it seemed a little mind-blowing at the time. Now it may seem obvious, right? But at the time it was a bit mind-blowing, this idea that, well, maybe certain traits were not controlled by one of these particles that Mendel spoke of, but by many. And if you applied Mendel's math, Mendel's formulas, to many genes at once, it was relatively easy for people who knew math to come up with these distributions that now, instead of being black or white, was a whole range of grays, with some mid-grays being the most abundant, very dark grays or black being fewer, very light grays or white being fewer, right? These Gaussian distributions of characteristics. So that merging of the Mendel's particulate theory of inheritance with the blending theory of inheritance is what people call the modern synthesis, and this happened in the early 1900s. So Mendel does his work in 1830 plus, and 50 years later, someone figured out, okay, maybe both are right. Okay? And then on top of that, and with the advent of molecular genetics, and more people saying, okay, this guy Mendel was onto something. Let's look into this some more. I wasn't involved in any of that, but proverbial we found about Mendelian extension. So the same laws that Mendel described apply to very specific cases in which there seems to be deviations from the normal behavior, but that are totally explainable by his laws. And we'll study those as well. And then with the advent of molecular genetics, we started understanding a little better the influence of the environment. right? This idea that even for heritable traits, there's always some influence from the environment, right? And there's one thing that I don't have it on this slide, but I'm gonna give you a sneak peek that we'll come across later in the semester. P equals G plus E plus G times E. And that is short for phenotype, is the outcome of a combination of the genotype plus certain environmental inputs plus the interaction between those two. Because there may be certain genotypic or genetic backgrounds over which the environment has a different influence than others. Hence the idea, you guys may have come across this idea that there are no cancer genes, very few cancer genes, but there is cancer susceptibility genes. What does that mean? It means that there are certain genes that will make a person more predisposed to perhaps developing a cancer should they encounter certain environmental toxins or stimuli or inputs of some kind.
Is that where carcinogenic chemicals, is that like they cause mutations in the gene that cause that?
A little more than that. So carcinogens could affect, carcinogens tend to affect genes in an unbiased manner because they're chemicals that they interact with DNA and they will go and mutate any gene no matter what. What I'm talking about is slightly different. What I'm talking about is certain genes that might make you more predisposed to developing cancer even if there are no mutations involved, even if there is no damage to DNA per se, right? Even if you, quote unquote, haven't done anything wrong, right? Does that make sense? And I said cancer, when you start looking, you're gonna find X susceptibility genes for pretty much every X. Diabetes susceptibility genes, Alzheimer's susceptibility genes, autism susceptibility genes, and so forth, right? Any questions? No? All right, so this was, super brief overview. On Thursday, we're gonna go from Mendel onwards, and we'll get to DNA and RNA. And then next week will be about transcription, translation, things that once again you may have heard and studied before, but we'll review and go a little deeper.